What if the sexiest things about us are the ones that we're most terrified people might see? The things that we're taught to mask or hide in order to belong, to fit in.
For me, I know that fear showed up pretty early. I grew up in a conservative religious community. By the time I was 12 or 13, I knew I was queer, and also that being seen would mean basically losing everything.
For me, it also showed up pretty early as a young girl growing up between a Pakistani culture and a British one, being taught to stay small, to hide my body, to be successful but not too successful. That almost if I was really seen for who I was, that something bad would happen.
What we're talking about here are the scripts we inherit. Those unspoken rules about who you're allowed to be if you want love, safety, or belonging. And we don't get to choose those scripts. They're handed down to us from family, culture, religion.
Yeah, they're like our emotional inheritance, right? You don't even question them. You just live your life with these unspoken rules. And it isn't just shame that keeps us trapped in these scripts. It's also the fear of the possible consequences. Fear of being rejected, fear of being punished. So here's the hypothesis we want to explore on the podcast today. What if, when you trace your fear all the way to the root, you don't actually find something broken or shameful, but you find the part of you that's actually being starving to be fully expressed?
And here's the best bit. What if that part is actually the most magnetic and sexy thing about you? Most of us were given a cookie-cutter template for how to live, love, and succeed. But what if you don't fit that mold? What if you're ready to live a little differently, even if that makes you the odd one out?
We're Nyla and Cole, two people questioning the systems, the stories, and the identities that shape us. From politics to pleasure, culture to connection, this is where taboo meets truth.
If you've ever felt like a black sheep, cycle breaker, or someone who doesn't quite fit the cookie-cutter mold, then you're a deviant just like us. Let's do it. So what we're going to do in this discussion is pull a lot from our own stories, but also from a lot of the really common scripts that men and women are given about gender norms, gender roles, sexuality, and whether those shame scripts really are helping us or hurting us, right?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so if you'll allow me, I want to start with maybe a very obvious example of what I'm trying to talk about, and that is the shame of realizing you're gay in a fundamentalist Christian middle American household, which is something I can relate to.
Small things.
Yeah. Okay. So very briefly, I mean, I realized maybe as early as 12 or 13 that I was this thing, and this thing was bad. My therapist friend, Jess, she and I were discussing how the difference between shame and guilt is feeling bad for doing something wrong, whereas shame is feeling bad for just being wrong. And like, as this little 12-year-old, I had done nothing, but I just knew that my inherent existence, my being, who I was bad and gross and icky and not welcome. And that realization was terrifying. I mean, it was terrifying for all sorts of reasons, not really because I was afraid of like homophobia or bullying, but because of the consequences of what would happen when my community discovered my shame, what would happen when I was found out for being wrong. You know, I grew up in this tight-knit church community. I was afraid of basically losing that, becoming an outcast, not having a community or a home anymore. And then even with more accepting people who would accept me as being gay, I was really afraid of being pigeonholed as like Cole the gay guy. And I was afraid that this identity would somehow really reduce me to just this one facet. And so I just saw my life being isolated and small. And that was my deep fear. So what was the script that I was supposed to follow? I mean, if you're a gay man in a world where that's not welcome, your script is to repress, deny, pretend you're not, marry a woman, and then just not ruin your own life, but ruin hers in the process. Like there's nothing about this script that's healthy for anyone, including the people you love.
Yeah, the script is basically don't be gay.
Yeah, exactly. And unfortunately, that's really not an option. Exactly. No. So because of that, I really had no choice. I'm not trying to I think you and I were talking about maybe facing our fears, but that's not what it felt like for me. I didn't feel like doing this courageously. I just really had to chuck out the script because there was no way forward. And then turns out what happens when you don't have a script is you get freedom. Suddenly anything's on the table. And then what I ended up doing with that freedom was making myself an outcast and just fleeing my community and getting the heck out of there.
So
I went
what
to
did
college.
that look like? What did that look like? How did that take shape? Because that's quite wild to think about.
I mean, the first decision I got to make was where to go to school. And I knew I just needed to go to another state. So I went to school in California. And then...
Good state to pick.
Yeah, I'll be honest, that was a factor. And then so many of my decisions about what to do with my life after that involved just kind of like running away from my community. And there's something really ironic because my base fear was losing that community and getting cast out. And I ended up just doing that to myself. I mean, it was a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. But, and I don't want to get into all the details of how I finally worked up the guts to come out to my parents, how I finally worked up the guts to even start dating. It took me a lot longer than it should have. It was not easy. I had no idea what would happen when I finally started facing this thing. People say there's nothing that feels better about finally coming out and being authentic. But for me, I had no idea what awaited me on the other side. So it honestly felt more like I was jumping off of a cliff rather than being able to embrace myself. The journey was terrifying. And so I can only look back in hindsight and realize that the things I love most about who I am and what my life is actually came from removing myself from that community. I just embraced traveling, and I've traveled the world. I've made really meaningful connections with people from around the world. It's fueled this natural curiosity I have to explore and connect in so many different ways, different cultures. This fear of losing my community ended up being the engine for travel, adventure, connection globally, and it actually expanded my life. And I don't feel estranged now. I feel like my life has become bigger.
Yeah, it's kind of wild, right? Like the thing that you found yourself immediately kind of desperately wanting to hold on to in some way and afraid of losing became the thing that you actively chose to reject yourself in the end.
Yeah, surprise, surprise. I think back to what if I kept my head down and followed that script? I'd be pretending to be something I wasn't in a community that didn't understand me in a very small corner of the globe and limiting myself. It's crazy to think about.
Yeah, it's also hugely courageous. And maybe you didn't feel this at the time. Maybe you felt like you had no other choice in terms of the steps you could take. But I feel like another important factor in being able to stare these inherited scripts in the face is to say, wow, this really doesn't fit for me, and it's very limiting, and it's, quite linear. And I think as a young person who is, the black sheep where everyone around you seems to be fitting that mold, I think it's hugely courageous to stare that in the face and say, I'm going to choose something different, even if people around me don't get it, because you're ultimately, we're relational beings. We all have a human need to want to belong somewhere. And to choose to reject the community that's closest to you in that way is, I'm assuming it felt maybe quite lonely at times and quite challenging to experience that by yourself.
Yeah, I mean, deeply isolating. I will say the times I felt loneliest were when I had intellectually figured out who I was and who I am, but I was still pretending to be something else. Most of my college years, I wasn't open, even with my closest friends. And so it's very lonely because you know that you're living a lie and you know that you don't fit. So the loneliness was in trying to keep up that charade, right? And I mean, look, it's kind of you to call it courageous, but I do, going back to these scripts, in a lot of ways we weren't given a choice because these cultural scripts we all inherited don't even have a place for us, and we have to start from scratch. But I think there's also a lot of courage in straight men and women who realize that they need to adapt these scripts and figure out what works about these scripts and what doesn't. And so, I think it is useful to start with my example with this hypothesis because Yeah, I think there is a lot that queer people can teach about just the benefits of staring your fear in the face, and
Right.
realizing that that fear is actually the sexiest thing about you that can launch you to untold
Yep.
places. I mean, my fear of getting cast out of Colorado is actually the greatest thing that's happened to me. And my identity now is a person who just feels so connected and plugged into the world. And I'm so thankful for that.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's my big crazy example of how my fear actually set me on this course of really loving who I am and being proud of the life I've led.
Yeah, I love
Um,
that. Yeah, I think there is actually a lot that we can learn from the queer experience. And, I think queer people are living proof that there's something really sexy about the things that you fear the most, because they are really able to express themselves authentically. And you can see that they're either in the process of, or they have rewritten those scripts for themselves just by sheer kind of, definition of living in a society that doesn't include their experience.
that's
So,
it.
whilst these scripts are, inherited, and as you say, like many of them have been absorbed by us from, our early years and our childhood, there is a way that we can reform these on our own terms. And I love that.
Yeah,
I think
that's a
there's
great way
like,
of putting it. Yeah.
yeah, there's like so much power in feeling like I don't have to feel stuck in this way that I'm expected to be.
Yeah, exactly. You don't need to chuck the script out, but you can
Mm,
adapt it to what really suits you.
yeah.
So let's start with straight men, because unfortunately, there's a lot that straight men and gay men have in common in terms of just being told what's not acceptable. There's so
Mm,
much fear of being a sissy, being a weakling, not being man enough. And
right.
it's that big homophobic fear that shapes a lot of these straight male scripts too, right?
Yeah, you've got to make sure that you're unbreakable, this really strong persona, always horny, always unemotional. Like, are you masculine enough?
Yeah,
Are
it's
you
yeah.
performing? Don't be too emotional. All of these things that men are supposed to fit into, right?
Exactly. Fears of not being man enough, not being tough enough, not being
Mm,
hard enough, being too soft or
mm,
emotional, or
mm.
sensitive. I think those are the fears that really shape a lot of the expectations for how men are supposed to
Yeah.
behave in society and in relationships and in the bedroom.
Yeah, and the irony is that most straight women I know are actually really excited to meet straight men who are challenging these scripts, who are willing to explore different templates for masculinity, who are willing to explore their inner world with a bit more vulnerability and share, their fears and their insecurities, and talk about that and grow together and learn together and reflect, right?
Mm. You and I were talking about this, and you were talking about what really turns you on about a guy, and it's when he gets a little vulnerable, when he opens up about his emotional world, when he lets
Mm-hmm.
you in on the sort of chaos of his inner world.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. I
that's where
mean,
this hypothesis really started to click for us. Was the thing that really attracts you to a guy is when he lets you into that softer side of emotion and vulnerability, and it's the exact opposite of the fear that men have that they try to
exactly.
hide. Yeah.
Right? Exactly. I mean, I always say emotional maturity is the new sexy. I think
Mm.
it's the hottest thing in a partner. And I often joke with my female friends that, there should be a filter on these apps about, for emotional maturity, or has someone been to therapy or something like that. But
Now, that's actually interesting. How can you, when you do meet a guy or go on a date with a guy, how can you tell if he has emotional maturity? How can you sort of test for that? What are the giveaways?
yeah, I wish I knew the answer to this and I could kind of reel it off more concretely. But I guess the things that I'm interested in exploring is like, is this person able to be reflective? Can they talk
Mm.
about what they've learned through their kind of relational history? Can they talk about how they've grown, what they do differently now in relationships to what they did before? Maybe even are they able to kind of share vulnerably what they find challenging still, and
Mm.
talk about how they're still growing in places, rather than are they putting on a front and performing this kind of cool guy persona. And it's interesting, right? Because I find confidence really sexy in a partner,
Mm.
but there's a fine line. How can you be confident but also be vulnerable, and also be reflective, and also show your areas of growth? and also not be too cocky, right? There's kind of no perfect way to do it. But one thing that really struck me once in a conversation with a guy was probably one of the most honest ways that he talked about one of these inherited scripts, I guess, without realizing it was, we were talking about, a date that he had been on, and I could tell that he really wanted to be more open in how he was feeling. But I could see that, the question really on his mind was, if I show her the chaos of my inner world, is she still going to find this sexy? And I was trying to say, yes, of course,
please let me in.
Yeah, please. Let's have these kinds of emotionally mature conversations, because let's be honest, we've all got stuff going on. Everybody's dealing with some insecurities. We're all human. No one's perfect here. And
that's what makes you a three-dimensional human being, right? We want to be dating a human, not a robot.
Right. And I think actually in a world where there's a lot of shame scripts associated with sexual intimacy with partners when you're dating and things like that. People always are shaming things like one night stands and that kind of stuff because you're promiscuous and you're whatever. I think it's actually easier to be sexually intimate with somebody than it is to be emotionally intimate with somebody, right? Letting somebody into your emotional inner world is much harder, actually. And so it feels much more connecting, personally, I would say.
Yeah. And that connection is something we all crave, right? It's it's crazy. Even talking about you want signs that the men you're dating are evolving and growing. It sounds crazy that should fly in the face of male scripts, but there is this idea that straight men are just supposed to be these stoic statues, these sex machines. They know who they are, but no, you actually want to see growth and reflection. These are all naturally good things, but they're not part of the scripts a lot of the time, which is actually crazy to me.
Yeah, and I think a lot of what feels good in intimacy for me is about emotional presence, right? And I think there comes a point where when somebody is withholding or they are kind of putting on the cool girl or the cool guy kind of persona, you can just tell after a while because it starts to feel a little bit superficial, right? And surface level. And you kind of don't get beyond that. So after a while, that starts to feel really flat for me. And I think it's hard for me to sustain a connection with somebody that isn't willing to bring emotional presence. And, ultimately we're all kind of looking to be stimulated in different ways in a partnership and in a connection. So I would, if I could tell the men out there something, I would say that your insecurities and your fears and your flaws don't make you less desirable. The truth is, if you stop performing and pretending and trying to hide those and are able to kind of share and reflect and be vulnerable with your partner and show that there's space for growth on both sides, I think that's incredibly sexy.
It's actually pretty damn sexy. Yeah, when you put it exactly, it shouldn't be a newsflash, but that's sexy. I mean, don't get us wrong. A bro who goes to the gym, gets swole, that's sexy. You and I, we've both dated people who are maybe a little addicted to the gym, and it makes them look great. But you and I both talked about how when the obsession is just on the physical, I mean, one of the new scripts, we've talked, a lot of these scripts are always evolving and we like to think it's getting better all the time, but I'm actually seeing a new script emerging for men, which is that they need to treat their bodies like these perfect machines and just, strive for physical perfection and always be challenging themselves physically. And so now that's given rise to all the CrossFits and High Roxes. And we put so much pressure now on the physical. And that's just taking men further and further away from the chance to connect with themselves and connect with the people they're dating, right?
Right. Yeah.
And just be interesting, frankly. It's not interesting when someone spends half their life at the gym. They just get more boring the bigger their muscles get.
Yeah, I mean, we all love a six-pack, don't we? We all love.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I agree. I think there's, beauty standards have been core part of women's shame scripts for a long time, but this whole kind of body dysmorphia and this kind of obsession with performance and needing to look a certain way and present a certain way. You talked about this in kind of the gay circles a lot more, being really front and center and present as a core part of even feeling like you belong in those spaces.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, it's I think probably sits across the board for a lot of straight men too.
And it's actually a good point to mention. We talk about like shedding these scripts and embracing who you are, but there's scripts everywhere. And the sad truth is that the queer community has created so many of their own scripts that people get trapped into. One of them in the gay male space is, are you hot enough to be here? Do you work out enough to go to a gay party? And that's a new way of evaluating your self-worth. And so it's a shame. Yeah. We just keep creating these boxes to put people in and make people feel shame. And men now feeling like they need to treat their body like their machine is just a new cage we're all putting ourselves into. And it's a damn shame.
Yeah.
So, all right, let's talk about straight women now. And gosh, I mean, women are given a lot of scripts when it comes to their sexuality. Let's talk about
where do we start?
Right. Well, let's go to fears. I mean, what are the big things you think women end up being afraid of when it comes to desire or sexuality?
Don't be too much. Don't want too much. Don't ask for too much. Be pretty and beautiful, but don't be too sexy and promiscuous. And don't have desire. Don't talk about your sexual desires because it's not classy.
Right.
And
so,
it'll get you a bit of a reputation.
Right. Okay. Because if you actually try to connect to your sexiness, then you get branded.
And not only by the opposite sex, maybe even by other women. Apparently, it's not very tasteful to talk about your own sexuality and your connection to your own sexuality. It's something that other women are kind of taught to feel threatened from each other with. God. So there's so many hang-ups about not being able to actually use your voice and actually speak from your desire and connect to what you really want, but instead fit the mold that is acceptable about how you should present yourself, right? So talk about beauty standards, right?
So surprise, surprise, women sort of have these inverse scripts from men. If men feel like they got to be sex machines, women aren't even allowed to say they want sex.
Right.
Or they're supposed to be sexy, but not sexual. Is that
right? Yes, basically, right? And I think the irony, in the inverse of all of that is that I think a lot of men find it a huge turn on when their partners can be confident in their desire and to be, talk about what they like. And, there's that phrase, like, I'm going to butcher it now. Something in the bedroom, like...
Oh, lady in the streets, a freak in the sheets.
Right. Okay. Tells us everything we need to know, right? About how those shame scripts have formed. So I find it, as a man, I'll find it sexy if you're, able to be forward and embodied in your desire, and you tell me what you like and you lead in the bedroom. You're a freak in the sheets, but please be a lady when we're, out and about.
God, the world is so ridiculous. Okay, so surprise, surprise, women are afraid of being labeled some sort of whore because they're too sexual. But what their partners want is someone who is self-possessed of their sexuality, who knows what they want, can communicate what they want, brings sexuality to the bedroom. And it turns out men are turned on by sexual creatures. I mean, it's not...
Surprise,
it's this bizarre,
Go figure.
This bizarre paradox that women are told.
Yeah. Be sexy, but don't be horny.
Yeah.
Yeah. Should we check in on the hypothesis now?
Yeah. Okay. So this hypothesis that the sexiest thing about you is actually the thing that terrifies you.
You've got men afraid of their softness and their vulnerability in case that makes them look like they're not manly enough. And you've got women afraid of voicing their desire or appearing too much, worrying that guys won't stick around if they actually say what they want.
So it turns out some of the most fundamental rules about how men and women are supposed to conduct themselves with each other actually hold them back from being sexual, sexy, fulfilled, and even connecting with each other.
Yeah.
These are doing a huge disservice, not just for you, but for the people you're with, right?
Exactly.
I think that's what I find so interesting is that like there's no winners in a lot of these scripts.
No, and I think, it's in many ways I envy the queer community that they tackle this head on so early, often, that they don't carry the baggage of those inherited scripts into their adult relationships in the same way. I'm sure there's problems and there's challenges with all of that. And maybe, we talked about how some other scripts start forming, and that can also feel unhelpful at times. But just having the ability to question the scripts in the first place, I think a lot of people live their life without even realizing that they've absorbed these scripts from society all around them, and they just don't fit.
Yeah, it is. It's actually something I'm proud of as a queer person. We talk about gay pride. I didn't choose to be gay, but what I do think is really cool about the gay experience is when you realize that you get to go off script and just realizing that you can break the rules, because it's that freedom of rule breaking that just really opens the doors to unlocking desire and connecting us with ourselves. Because I think so much of what we're talking about is connecting with ourselves. And once you do that, you also get to connect to your desires. And queer people have gotten really good at that because we've sort of said F you to the rule book.
It comes back to the original reason that we even started this podcast, right? Of like, why is there a cookie cutter mold for everything? Yeah. Why is there only one way that we're supposed to feel intimacy and connection with people? And, who gets to decide these rules? And why are we coasting through life with this inheritance that we've gotten, instead of being intentional and using our autonomy and choosing what fits for us? Because we are all unique individual beings. We don't have to follow this kind of cookie cutter script for life and love and connection. I love that.
I think this is really getting to the heart of why we started this whole podcast. And again, we knew we wanted to start talking about shame and desire around the third episode, but it was only through the conversations you and I were having without a microphone around where we realized just how sexy it is to stare these fears in the face and connect with what they really say about us. Turns out being a deviant is sexy. I think that's what you and I learned. That's what you and I learned preparing for this podcast, right?
Exactly.
Surprise, surprise, everyone. There's nothing sexier than a deviant.
Yeah, we might be a bit biased.
Hey, I don't know. Just our opinion. We heard about my story with this hypothesis, but I definitely want to turn to you. You're a woman of color who grew up British Pakistani. And so I'd imagine for you growing up, you received a whole bunch of different scripts, and a lot of them probably contradicted each other. So what was it like trying to make sense of different scripts that didn't always seem compatible, went against each other? How did you manage that huge minefield?
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting and important nuance that sometimes gets missed, right? That actually there are lots of different scripts going on, lots of different cultural scripts going on, and particularly in a world that's more global now, where we're often living in different countries to the ones that we're born. My parents were migrants to the UK, and so by definition, everything when we were growing up was about fitting in. It was about belonging. But it was about belonging to a culture that was new to us, or to my parents at least. They were still learning the culture at the same time as trying to fit into it. And having a desire to want to make sure that their children still felt connected to their origin culture, right? So I found myself in this kind of double bind of never being Pakistani enough and never being British enough.
I mean, that must have been a head fuck, because even from your parents, you were almost getting conflicting instructions.
Right. Yeah. I mean, on the one hand, my mom was really hyper-focused on encouraging me to be an independent woman and not to be dependent on a man like, she had been, and to get an education and equip myself so that I could take care of myself. On the other hand, she was training me to be a good wife, a good Pakistani wife. And so often, those scripts, they conflict. And I think even she was confused about like how to teach it to me. Sure. And I'm not going to lie, it was really rough at times. And I think I spent a lot of my teenage years feeling really confused and feeling like I existed in this no man's land, where I wasn't understood. And if I ever expressed that to my parents, they just told me to kind of ignore it or kind of move on. But the other thing that was really prevalent growing up was that, I think as a woman in a South Asian culture, there's like a unique set of responsibilities that get put on your shoulders. So my mom would tell me every day as I left the house, your dad's honor is on your shoulders, my love. And I'd be like,
no pressure.
Whoa, Mom, that's a bit dramatic. But
what does that mean?
It means like, don't fuck up, because like, if you do, people in the community are going to talk about how, so-and-so's daughter is not a good girl, right?
So you had this huge fear of like disappointing your father and tarnishing his honor. The fear was like
my parents'
shame
honor
to your parents' name.
Right. And the thing is, that was never said to my brothers. So because what they chose to do didn't matter. Like, boys are always forgiven because boys will be boys, right? Whereas the conduct of your daughters, is reflective of your status in that society. It's really kind of messed up. And
it's very messed up. So what did this conduct involve? I mean, what were the scripts you had to follow to not give shame to your parents?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately what they did, they overprotected me, and they policed and scrutinized what I could and couldn't get involved in at school. So it was, don't have too many big ideas. Don't dream too big. Stay small. Be a good girl. Don't ask too many questions. Don't have too many needs. Why do you need these things? At times my parents would say to me, why do you need friends? You don't need friends. You've got family. You don't need friends.
Wow.
And by family, I mean like immediate family. We lived the nuclear family, my siblings and my mom and dad. But also my mom taught me to cook from the age of 11. So throughout my teenage years, it was, be a good big sister. Pick up your brother's plate after he's eaten. Haven't you cooked dinner for dad yet? He's going to be home from work soon. And all of these expectations around like how to be this kind of nurturing woman in service in the household, whilst at the same time being taught to strive for the A's and the A stars at school. And so this whole script of like, you can do it all, like be the bad bitch, independent woman, but also make sure to be pretty, and also don't be too sexy, and also don't ask for too much. Don't need too much. But
what I'm hearing is just like
keep everyone happy.
Exist. Yeah. I'm just hearing like exist in service of others. Exist to be the right assistant to your mom in the kitchen, to support your siblings, and just to live for other people. It's basically the script that I'm hearing in all this.
I mean, that's the way to get approval from your parents and from your community, is to be a good girl, right? And so like that also then extends to your sexuality, right? So if you think about what's happening in your teenage years, in puberty, you're kind of starting to connect with yourself as a sexual being. And that, I felt like my parents found that really threatening. More so for me as their daughter than they did for my brothers. But the whole modesty culture kicks in, right? So you're expected to hide your body. My dad wrote letters to school to ask that I be excluded from any sex education, which is ironic, right? It would have protected me, but actually he thought that might expose me more to a space that was, again, quite scary to my parents, that I would know what sex
He wrote
is.
and said, don't give sex education to my daughter.
Yeah, so I sat in the school library. It'll actually
corrupt her rather than protect her.
Yeah. I sat in the school library while everybody else had the sex ed classes. And guess what? Like in high school, everybody notices the one kid that's not in the class. Mortifying.
Talk about like fear of not belonging. You're there in high school and you're the one weirdo who's not allowed to learn about sex.
I was that weirdo.
And your parents just like put that sentence on you.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and this idea that...
have you learned about sex since then? Sorry.
A little bit.
Go on.
I've been working on my sex education now in my 30s, I think.
Hey, it's never too late.
Better late than never, as they say. But I think another important script was also about like, my body is threatening other people in my community, and it's potentially going to provoke them into acting a certain way. And so that's my fault. So you know how you were saying about the difference between guilt and shame, and
Yes.
feeling like you now carry the shame because, what was the definition of guilt? It's like feeling...
Yeah, guilt is feeling bad about what you've done. It's about actions, whereas
Right.
shame is about who you are.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I really resonate with that, because it was, again, this idea, I was almost told that I should feel guilty for having a body that was, you know, sexual and perhaps might provoke somebody else. So the whole modesty culture that tells you to hide yourself, you know, everything from, I wasn't allowed to wear anything that didn't have a full sleeve. I couldn't wear a half sleeve or a cap sleeve. I definitely could never wear something sleeveless. God forbid anybody see my arms.
So the shame was for having a body. Basically
Yeah,
having
pretty
a body
much.
that could tempt other people. That's like the inherent shame.
Exactly.
Jeez.
And then to make that worse, there's like another layer that I call the anti-surveillance, right? So for anybody who doesn't know, like in South Asian culture, we call all older ladies in our community aunties. It's a way of giving respect. But the aunties would talk about how I shouldn't go out in the sun because then I'll get too dark and nobody will want to marry me. And, you know, that wouldn't be good. So colorism is right.
Ashamed of the color of your skin.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And the fairer you are, the more desirable you are, right?
Yeah.
So this whole, you know, fair and lovely obsession with bleaching your skin. And, you know, Tan France has done a documentary talking about the kind of the depths that colorism has affected society, particularly in Asia. But this desire to kind of stay fair and, again, palatable to other people so that you look a certain way, you look pretty, and you're somebody that I might want to marry. But also it comes up in other ways, right? So I was often taught not to laugh loudly. Be more ladylike. Don't laugh so loud.
What? What's wrong with laughing?
It's just, you know, it's a bit too boisterous to be so loud. So just chip her down and just giggle. Girls are supposed to giggle, not laugh loudly.
So be small, keep quiet, be pale, hide your body.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. And then whilst I'm being encouraged to be all ladylike and nurturing and giving and cooking for everybody, I'm also being encouraged to be, you know, a straight A student and to get a good education and to like strive for a career, right? And so it's like, if I have any vision for what I might want to do in my life, it's like, don't compete with your brothers. Almost as though my success is overshadowing the success of the boys, the princes of this household. How dare I?
So succeed, but don't succeed too much.
Exactly. Don't be more successful than the boys.
Don't take up space. Just excel in every possible way, as long as you're not taking up space.
Yeah. Don't overshadow the men in the house. Be successful, but not too successful.
You seem so well-adjusted for being told all these
How did
insane...
I turn out like this?
Like, all these things contradict each other. Like, so many of these scripts we've talked about even contradict themselves. Like, excel, but make sure no one notices. Be beautiful, but don't tempt anyone.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it sounds exhausting.
It's a really confusing way to grow up as a young person. I think women have tough enough scripts as it is, but to then have to deal with all the kind of additional cultural layers. And I really struggled with my parents and like their direction around these things for a lot of years. But I really empathize now with how challenging it was for them to come from rural Pakistan. My mom didn't have much of a flying education herself. She didn't finish high school, and she moved to a new country, new culture, new language, new norms. And I think she did the best that she could. She also was trying to find a way to fit in whilst raising kids in a different country away from family without any connection to them. And so whilst it's been challenging for me to think about these scripts, I also have reflected a lot on like the root of them and where they came from and why my parents thought it was a good idea to say these multiple conflicting things to me. And I don't think they came from a bad place. I think they came from my parents, trying to push against their own boundaries of like, what should we teach our daughter?
Yeah.
And I think it really connects to this theme of belonging and needing to feel like somebody else can validate you, that you fit in here.
Well, it's so interesting. We've talked about belonging being a base fear that drives so much of these things, but even your parents were afraid of you not belonging, and that's why they slapped all these scripts on you. But then you also probably inherited that fear yourself of not belonging.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it really takes something pretty seismic to happen in your life for you to like step back, zoom out, and like really think about this kind of cage you've built around yourself, right? So I started to feel suffocated by this way that I was supposed to live. And I think what I didn't realize at the time was that this inheritance that I was carrying, I really needed to shed it, but I didn't have the words and I didn't know what that looked like. And I couldn't understand why I couldn't just accept the things around me that other people seemed to be okay with. I felt really caged.
Yeah, cage is a powerful metaphor. I even envision like this huge burden, like each script is just like an extra pack on your back. And we talk about how like shame can be good if it like puts you on the right track to fit into society. But actually all these rules are just weighing you down, imprisoning you. And they were all in disservice of you. You were trapped, bogged down, suffocating. Right. Doing the exact opposite of like learning shame is supposed to do for you.
Exactly. And I think I was getting to a point, I think after my divorce, I had probably one of the biggest moments to really reflect on this deeply conditioned belief that good girls are not supposed to be sexual and I should keep my feelings to myself. In the same way that you reflected on how coming out was probably the biggest gift in your life, I feel like my divorce was the biggest gift in my life. And it was very kind of low drama and very amicable. So everything felt quite respectful, but also it was an opportunity for me to really tune into these beliefs that I'd been living my life by around shame and desire and what was really the scaffolding that was holding up this shame and this shame cage.
Yeah.
This shame cage.
Yep.
And I think I asked myself some like really specific questions in this time. That really helped me to like unpack like what was going on. So firstly, like, what is my self-image? Do I even consider myself to be a desirable being? What do I think of my own sexuality and my own connection to it? And I was
you had
kind
been
of
told
shocked
to not even be, you were told you can't even be sexy. You can't be desirable. So you finally,
right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, I interrupted.
So no. So that, I think my own responses to that kind of shocked me a little bit. The second question was like, why does my culture want me to be ashamed of that I'm a sexual being? Why do they want me to be ashamed of it? Like, what is so threatening about my sexuality or anyone's sexuality? And I think what I realized was that I don't really feel like I can ask for what I want and be celebrated as a good South Asian woman in my culture. And it's the same thing, the fear that you had, that really in order to be true to myself and authentic and live the life that actually feels freeing and real for me, I have to turn my back on the very community that I feel I'm a part of.
I mean, it sounds like both you and I had to make our worst nightmares, so to speak, come true and step out of our communities, take a huge step back from the communities where we wanted to belong, because we realized that who we are actually doesn't belong at all. Right?
Yeah.
Is that harsh to say?
No, I mean, I think that
who we want to grow into doesn't fit in our community anymore. Maybe that's a better way of putting it.
Exactly. Like that person, that confidence, that realness, it can't exist in this tiny caged community. So really what's happening is you're like desperately trying to mold yourself to fit in a place where you're never going to fit.
I mean, you're trying to put a square peg in a round hole.
Yeah, pretty much.
I think you might have put it really well earlier to me, Nyla, but you and I felt forced to rebel against what we perceived as our community. We felt forced to rebel, but it ended up being a return to ourselves. It's not a rebellion against ourselves. It's a return to ourselves.
Yeah.
Just following that line, tugging the string of that fear, and that fear leads us back to ourselves.
Yeah, it's such a good point, actually, because I think that was the really transformative point in my life where instead of constantly fighting to belong in a place that I just probably could never belong,
Yeah.
I was able to kind of step back and just think about like, what are the values I want to live by? What's important to me in my life? What's the kind of vision I have for the rest of my life? And that
Yeah.
allowed me to kind of self-define what parameters I want to create so I can break out of this cage and create my own scripts, right? And it's about
Yep.
looking that inheritance in the face and saying, I need to shed this because most of this is not helpful to me. And also, I've outgrown it. Like we've moved 20 years down the line, you know, we're different people.
Well, it's that freedom. It's the freedom I talked about as part of the queer experience. And I think in your own way, you've embraced your queerness by rejecting these scripts, throwing this huge burden of scripts you were given and charting your own path forward.
Yeah.
So congratulations. Welcome. Welcome to the queer party.
Thank you. Yeah, there's a huge reframing in all of this, right? Which feels like it really connects to your identity, right? But it's instead of a scarce place of I don't belong or am I desirable, where you're asking another to validate you, you're asking to be externally validated, to a place of abundance where you are embracing and accepting of all of the various, you know, I accept my Britishness, my Pakistaniness, my weird random accent, my quirks and everything that makes me me. And I no longer need that to fit in somewhere. I fit in where I am. And I think that is the significant, probably confidence building difference that has helped me move from a place of, am I desirable to, do I desire here? You know, where it feels like autonomous and it's coming from me and it's I get to decide if this is something that I desire rather than asking somebody else to validate me about whether I'm desirable or not.
I was just about to ask where you think this whole journey has brought you now, but you've just plugged yourself right into this beautiful hypothesis we've been working on. I mean, so the question is like, has facing all these fears down, do you feel sexy on the other side? And what I'm hearing is you feel connected to yourself, you know yourself better, and you feel confident. And like, there ain't nothing sexier than that.
Yeah, I think
right?
confidence is sexy.
Oh, we all know it's sexy.
But also realness, right? I think the difference I feel in my body now is that I feel this real sense of like peace and calm in my inner monologue, where I used to feel this kind of constant hypervigilant anxiety. And I feel also like my inner critic has quietened down a little bit and almost been replaced by my inner cheerleader, you know, who's like ready for me to live the life that feels right for me and be freed of all of these things that I wouldn't allow myself to do or that I had absorbed about, you know, myself, this view I had of how I wasn't a sexy person and I wasn't supposed to have feelings and desires like that and I should just keep them to myself. And now it feels so liberating and so freeing. And I guess that's kind of what you were talking about as well, is like, it's just expansive energy, right?
Yeah. Oh, expansive energy. God, I love that phrase. Yeah, I mean, there's like maybe two kinds of confidence. There's the performative bravura that is probably connected to that like male script or just like being tough. Performative bravura.
What's
bravura.
That?
Look, it probably wasn't the right word. I think it's linked to this male script we talked about of walking around like a tough statue who doesn't need anything from nobody. No, that's a performance. But there's confidence in being at peace in your own skin. And that radiates. And that's sexy as hell. And that is what I think this whole journey has given you.
Yeah. And I think it's just empowering on so many other levels in life to know that you can question the scripts that you've been handed and choose to reform them and reframe them to live the life you want, right? YOLO,
the sky's the limit.
You've got one life. You get to live it how you want to live.
And once you realize that secret, the sky's the limit, you know?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So I think it's safe to say we've proven our hypothesis. In fact, maybe if I were to update the conclusion, it would be that being a deviant is sexy.
Oh, yes.
We have proven scientifically that being a deviant is sexy, and there's really nothing sexier than connecting with your fears and just leaning into them. So I guess, Nyla, for people this is the first time they've even started to think about shame scripts and the underlying fears that come with that, what do you have to tell them to start thinking about what to do with this big idea? What to do about this?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot to think about, right? But I would just say start by thinking about what part of yourself were you taught to fear? You know, if you think back to your younger experiences, what are the scripts that you might have inherited? Just have a think about some of those. And consider if they weren't a flaw, but maybe a signal to something that's more real. You know, what did you struggle with when it came to like conforming to what was expected of you? And if you want to go a step deeper, I would ask yourself, does this belief really protect me, or is it policing me in some way?
That's such a good distinction. Do these scripts protect us or police us? Oof. Yes.
Because that question can really undo years of inherited shame, I think. And I think once you start loosening the grip of even just one inherited belief, it starts to become easier to reflect on your real desire, your real confidence, your relationships. Everything has room to change. So the point isn't that we don't have to fit the script. The point is that we get to write our own scripts for the way that we want to live.
Yeah. And once you start doing that, the possibilities are endless. You and I have both stumbled into that truth.
Yeah. And it's an ongoing experience, right? I don't think you kind of ever get there. I think we're both continuing to learn about ourselves and continuing to reflect on the things that we believe in.
Gosh, I sure hope so. I know I still have a long way to go.
Well, we keep each other honest, at least.
Yeah, thank God for that. Well, on that note, deviants, until next time, stay curious, stay kind, and stay just a little bit deviant.
Bye.
All right. See you, everyone.